Good morning and welcome you all to this super exciting session of today on the Champions League on the transition to sustainability. This is Hub 3, Digital, and we have a great panel with us. We have 45 minutes, we have a Director General, and we have a sneak preview of something which is really great. So colleagues, Europe has been hit very, very hard by complex societal, economic, and environmental dilemmas. And the coronavirus has not done anything else but to amplify these dilemmas and challenges. Less resilient EU countries have actually been hit harder by the crisis. And to respond to this, the European Union has equipped itself with the right goals, such as the emission reduction target, the right policies, and also with an ambitious and really right budget. And all this to ensure competitive sustainability. At her State of the Union speech, in fact, President von der Leyen made it very clear. She said that the crisis has revealed the limits of a model that values wealth over well-being. So today's question is actually, with all those new challenges ahead, the European Union being equipped in a different way, how can we also equip the EU to measure that well-being and the policies that we are putting in place to achieve it? And the uncomfortable truth that we face when we are entering into this area is that the evidence is often partial, it is scattered, it is disconnected from the public debates. We're making progress, of course, to measure sustainability. And Eurostat's report on the SDGs is a very clear example of that. However, we do not have a helicopter view on sustainability, and we don't have a snapshot on the country's performance. So my colleagues Peter Durrell and Pierre Vigier have been working very hard on a visionary manner to fill in this gap between reality and measurement, and today you will get a sneak preview of this. But now let's go and move on to the real hot stuff here, and I give the floor to our Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission, Jean-Éric Paquet. Please, Jean-Éric, you have the floor.
Roman, thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. I must say, as we move into this third day of the Research and Innovation Days, the titles of the sessions are becoming better and better. I really like this notion of a Champions League for sustainability. So well done, Pierre and Roman. And thanks a lot to all of you participating in the panel. This is a panel which I hope is going to be groundbreaking in the sense that, as Roman just indicated, we are working in the Commission. This is led by teams in the Joint Research Centre here in DG Research and Innovation, but we are working with many others on trying to establish this transition index which would capture the 4 dimensions of sustainability: social, economic, environmental, and governance. And scoreboards and indexes matter. They drive policies. They allow different policies to emerge and to be supported. We have the evidence, we have a lot of data, but we don't yet have this performance index, which would allow to bring it together and which hopefully could then also help the very many politicians, public officials, but also actors in the economy and in society which are trying to implement the Sustainable Development Goals in a holistic way, to have an index which would confirm the relevance and the direction of their engagement and their policies. This follows, it's quite interesting for me because this follows from a discussion which we had a year ago at the first Research and Innovation Days in September 2019, where we had a session on redefining prosperity, and where one of the conclusions was not new in itself, but for me very important, that the indicators and indexes we have don't allow these different policies to fully emerge, with particularly, of course, this over-reliance on the GDP indicator. And this is where colleagues started to work in DG Research and Innovation, and as said, with many others in the Commission. And so today we will present to you where we stand on this Sustainability Transitions Index. We will have a number of very, very distinguished experts which will tell us if we got it right or where we might still want to improve it. And I very much hope that I will be sitting again in this panel next year at the third Research and Innovation Days, and that we will be able to report that the index is now up and running and is being picked up and having some impact. I hope that this will be the case. Roman, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Eric. This has been really spot on and very topical. I think that your presence particularly shows how important it is for the Commission to jump from measuring wealth to measuring well-being. Without further ado, I will give now the floor to Daniela Benavente. Daniela is an economist. She has a PhD in economics, and she's a consultant in composite indicators. She has very extensive experience with various international organizations, FAO, OECD, UN, and even with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, where she has been working on indices such as the European Skills Index and the Food and Agriculture Vulnerability Index. So Daniela, please, the floor is yours. Please remember to stick to a strict maximum of 10 minutes so that we can proceed with the rest of the agenda, which is pretty tight. Thank you very much, Daniela. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning to all. Thank you, Mario. I have a big challenge, 10 minutes, to convince you that the TPI is not just welcome, it is also conceptually sound, statistically robust, and insightful. Next slide, please. Next. So why a new index? Next. First, the TPI responds to new priorities. In effect, it measures progress along 4 transitions: economic, social, environmental, and governance, which mirror EU priorities that economies work for people, promoting the European way of life, the Green Deal, and a new push for democracy. Next. Second, the TPI aims at complementing existing frameworks. The main inspiration comes from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals adopted back in 2015, a collection of 17 goals, 10 times as many targets, and more than 200 indicators designed to be a blueprint towards achieving a better world by 2030. Jeffrey Sachs, a special advisor to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, leads a global and comprehensive SDG index, the Sustainable Development Report, while the EU and the OECD have been monitoring progress for their members. Next slide, please. The OECD has also developed a parallel effort, the Better Life Index, with a slightly different focus on material living conditions and quality of life. All these indices, next slide, please, together with Kate Raworth Donut on social and planetary boundaries, have been an inspiration for the TPI. So what is the value added of the TPI? There are 3 main aspects. The computation of a ranking. This is not just a scoreboard. The SDG-related yet simple framework around only 25 internationally comparable indicators, and the 10 years of backcasting of the index. Next. Now, what is the conceptual approach of the TPI? The TPI, next slide, please. The TPI framework responds to global priorities with a focus on the 4 transitions already mentioned, each divided into 4 sub-pillars. These 16 sub-pillars can be interpreted transversally as well around broad themes. Some emphasize opportunity, such as education, work and inclusion, energy productivity, transparency. Others, resilience, such as industrial base, health, resource productivity, or fundamental rights. Others focus on prosperity and the better life, such as wealth, free time, biodiversity protection, or security. And others on intergenerational fairness, such as R&D intensity, equality, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and sound public finances. Next slide. The TPI is a beyond GDP, global, outcome-oriented tool aimed at citizens and policymakers alike. It covers 25 indicators, as I said, the entire decade 2010-2019, and 72 countries representing more than 90% of world GDP. Further, it is transparent and replicable and easy to update. With improved or new data, it can be extended to other countries or at the subnational level. Its robust unidimensional nature allows to encourage its use in analytical research, and I will expand on these next. So the TPI is a statistically robust indicators. This is what I will try to show now. That what follows is a bit technical, but please bear with me. So just like any composite indicator, the definition of the framework followed a top-down process that involves several stakeholders and experts, and a thorough revision of the literature, empirical research, and policy goals and targets. The statistical part then included 3 processes: the selection of indicators, modeling choices, and an independent audit by the EU Joint Research Centre. Next. The TPI follows a state-of-the-art methodology set in the OECD EU Handbook on Constructing Composite Indicators, which involves 10 main steps, such as the imputation of missing data, the treatment of outliers, the normalization, weighting, and aggregation of scores, among others. All steps are detailed in the report and its different annexes. Next. Rankings present frequent limitations, such as double counting, weak impact of some indicators, or the overuse of subjective indicators, lack of replicability, or lack of robustness due to missing data. The TPI addressed these limitations first by including a limited set of mostly hard, complete, distinct, non-redundant, and timely statistics, and second by fine-tuning all modeling choices following the independent audit. Next. For example, the uncertainty analysis shows the TPI ranking median ranks and confidence intervals based on a combination of 35 different computation models that were tested. The shorter the gray bar, the more robust the ranking. And it turns out the choice of different modeling choices, and particularly goalposts, became a great determinant of the robustness of the TPI ranking, as shown in this figure. Next. We also assess the coherence between the conceptual framework and modeling choices with principal components analysis, with just one PC with eigenvalue greater than 1, explaining more than 68% of total variation. The unidimensional structure of the index was confirmed, which is a crucial result. The second PC, which explains 22% of total variation, shows the specificity of the environmental pillar that is recurrent in composite indicators. In the future, convergence is expected based on existing policy commitment. For example, there is the carbon neutrality target adopted last year at the COP25, not only by the EU, but by several countries. Next. I hope to have convinced you that the TPI is welcome, sound, and robust. I will now show that it is also insightful and useful. Next. We are not disclosing results until the end of November. This table is here only for illustrative purposes to present transition groups based on scores. So what we have is that we divided all countries into 5 categories: transition leaders, followed by strong, good, moderate, and weak transition. Next. I can confirm, though, even though I'm not disclosing results, I can confirm that all 27 EU countries belong to the strong and good transition groups, and that all show progress over the last 10 years, as shown in this graph with the bar and the colored and the gray bars. Next. We also show that progress is not a prerogative of good performers or of the EU. Several countries in good and moderate transition, the blue and yellow dots, present significant progress over the last decade, as shown by the quadrants to the right. Next. This scatter plot shows that the TPI goes indeed beyond GDP. EU countries, in purple in the figure, perform better than peers in development, for example, but read vertically or horizontally, the figure shows that wealth is not a determinant of TPI performance. Next. The TPI can be used in further research as well. This figure plots the TPI against EU's Digital Economy and Society Index. With an R-square of 0.6, one hypothesis that could be tested is whether transition and digitalization challenges present co-benefits, for example. Next. Okay, so this is my last slide. In terms of insights, our goal is to promote evidence-based policymaking. For example, that country profiles become a go-to resource for best practices and strengths and weaknesses, that goalposts will signal policy space, targets, and implicit trade-offs, and that transition groups and backcasting will reflect levels, trends, and progress over time. Finally, our hope is to convey a sense of urgency, promoting ownership of the TPI by citizens, and supporting policy dialogue and accountability of policymakers to citizens. Thank you for your attention, and I leave you with a slide with detailed modeling choices. The next 2 slides, please. For discussion. Thank you.
Many, many thanks, Daniela. That was a super clear and rich presentation. And now I think we know much more about the Transitions Performance Index, the framework that it uses, the concept, the data, and the policy pointers. So thank you very much. That was really a splendid presentation. Now I would actually listen to our 5 top panelists that we have with us today. I will ask the panelists, each of you, please, to stay and to a strict 4 minutes intervention, so that we leave a little bit of space, for potential questions coming from the audience through Slido. But I will start, maybe by taking you in sequence. I will start with Mario. Mario Biggeri, you are Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Florence. You are also the kind of leader of the program on economic development, and with Andrea Ferranini, you wrote a fantastic report for us on sustainability, on research and innovation, touching upon many issues, including inclusiveness. So my question to you is, in your view, how can inclusiveness best be measured, and what do you think that the TPI is having, as a strong points in capturing that dimension of inclusiveness? Over to you, Mario.
Yes, thank you very much. I have been working with my colleague Andrea Ferranini on research paper for the GG Research and Innovation, focusing on new framing on R&I policy for sustainable development. In other words, the focus was to think the transition starting from research and innovation. The transition should not become a buzzword, neither a jargon in rethinking the development pillars, but it should become a real process of change that challenge our academic discipline, policymakers, creativity, and enters in our daily life as citizens. So, well, I think that we should all start to think differently. And I believe that the TPI index is really well thought, and it is really very important for us in general, and also to try to balance the understanding of the transition also from a sustainable competitive perspective. I believe, and I really thanks Daniela about her presentation and the effort of all the group in creating this index. The 4 pillars of transition towards sustainability are fine, and the idea to governance accountability, which is added to the 3 usual pillars, is not new, but very well introduced, and I think very much appreciable, is very much appreciated by myself. Then also the selection of variables has been quite strong, and the idea of introducing some indexes very carefully, the 4 domains, and I feel that is robust. But you are asking me about what is the relevance in terms of social inclusion, given the fact that I have been working on these issues for long. I do think that this index brings novelty, and this novelty is very important, especially if you think the purpose of this index. So bringing the idea of sustainable competitiveness and the idea of transition while at the same time it tried to include elements that are so relevant for the actual debate in the European Commission and in the European Parliament about the Green Deal. And I feel that TPI is on the right track. In terms of leave no one behind and social inclusion, I think that the discussion in general could be linked also to the Amartya Sen capability approach in terms of theory and to the sustainable human development and the Agenda 2030. But this has been done, and I think in quite a very interesting way. I found that social inclusion is found in 3 of the 4 pillars. I have to be clearly critical. My appreciation of the index is clear, and I very much appreciate it. But I want to say something that could be helpful. So the idea is that maybe I would have expected the presence of vulnerable group indicators. I saw in one of the meetings we had that this was one of the idea. So maybe my desire, giving my attention to this special part, is to give more, to see more about gender disparities. There is this employment related to gender, which is very important, and I feel is a very important element. But maybe other groups like the NEET, so not in employment, not in education, could be important. So something more about the young, and maybe something more about person with disability. But I know that in having a strong index, especially if you are able to compare different years, and this is very important, and may create some difficulties for some type of indicators.
Thank you very much.
And the idea is to maintain it.
Mario, thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to stop you because I have to give the floor to the next speaker.
So my hope is really that it will be used, and I'm really willing and looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. This was a very, very clear presentation. Really interesting what you were saying. Also, thanks for your suggestions on the vulnerable groups. I will now move to Patricia. Patricia Heidegger, you are at the European Environmental Bureau, and you lead the work of the Bureau on Sustainable Development. You are also part of the steering group of SDG Watch Europe, where you follow the implementation of SDGs, and you actually present shadow reports on these SDGs for the European Union. So, Patricia, in your view, what are the musts and the must-nots in measuring sustainability performance? And do you think all the right stuff is inside the TPI? Thank you. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me in this interesting debate about the TPI. And good morning, everyone. Well, tomorrow, the 25th of September, is the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. And this is why we'll be presenting a report tomorrow with an analysis what meaningful sustainability indicators look like. And we're also arguing that the sustainability indicators used by Eurostat currently, at least to some degree, also create an illusion of sustainability. So I would like to share only 2 criteria for meaningful sustainability indicators with you now. Number 1, meaningful sustainability indicators should keep us focused on our biggest sustainability challenges. To illustrate this, one of our biggest challenges in terms of sustainability in the EU is our overall ecological footprint. In the EU, we have some of the highest per capita environmental footprint in the world. We are the most resource-dependent continent of all. 60% of the land that we need to produce our agricultural and forestry products are actually not within the EU, but in other countries in the world. So bringing down resource use and raw material use must be one of our biggest objectives. But the EU hasn't set any target on this objective. Now, what happens quite often in sustainability reporting is that we do not count the total amount of raw materials and resources that a given society and economy use. The TPI that you propose is looking into indicators such as resource productivity, but such indicators are not able to really track whether we're successful in bringing down resource and raw material use in absolute numbers. So the result of such indicators is that countries, European countries, tend to rank very high or tend to rank as top performers in such sustainability rankings, while we have some of the highest ecological footprint in the world. So we should look, for instance, into things like overshoot days, the day in a year when a country and its economy have used up the resources, the ecological services that we can use in a year and that the Earth can regenerate. So, for instance, the TPI could look into ecological footprint measuring or into material flow accounting. The second one is meaningful sustainability indicators also need to measure negative impacts on global commons and need to measure the negative spillover effects that we have on other parts of the world. So if we again look at the EU, for instance, the consumption of certain agricultural commodities, be it meat, soy, biofuels, can exacerbate deforestation. Our supply chains are linked to labor exploitation. The increased demand for mined raw materials, for instance, for the digitalisation, can drive displacement and environmental conflict. Illicit financial flows and unfair tax regimes supported by governments in the EU have significant impacts on developing countries. So the Eurostat SDG indicators, and as far as I can see also the TPI, ignore such negative spillover effects on the sustainable development of other countries. One example is SDSN. Their measurement of sustainability includes the spillover index score, a score that measures global environmental and socioeconomic impacts embodied in trade for each country. And as expected, European countries have a rather unfavorable score. So if we do not include global commons and spillover effects, the EU's negative impacts on third countries are unmeasured and they go unaccounted for.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for this great intervention. I think I noted particularly 2 points. Your point on the ecological footprint and the overshoot days, and also the spillover effects, influencing other countries. Thank you very much for that. I have to move on to Frederic. Please, I ask you speakers to stick to the 4 minutes because we need to take some questions from the audience as well. Frederic, you have a very, very rich experience in media. You as publisher and editor of Euractiv and correspondent of France 24. You also write articles daily on topics that are related to sustainability. So on the twin transitions, how do you think is this gap in terms of size between politics, policy, and kind of public perception? And will the TPI contribute to closing that gap? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, hi. Maybe I will start with a bit of a reality check, because it's not the first time that the Commission has tried promoting these kinds of sustainability index. If I remember correctly, already in 2009, the Commission published a communication on this, Beyond GDP, which was not really followed up at the time. There isn't still a lot of visibility for those kind of indexes. So has the moment now come to change this? Well, there are reasons to believe that it could. First, we have the European Green Deal, which has provided considerable momentum to sustainability issues. And that suggests that the Transition Performance Index could receive more attention in this context. Also, we see increasingly the private sector picking up on these kinds of things. You have, for example, rating agencies like S&P, which communicate on sustainability issues now on a regular basis. And in the private sector, you see companies reporting increasingly on things like climate risks. And that is something which is also gaining momentum. The Commission actually is thinking about making that kind of reporting standardized and mandatory. So it seems there's a lot of goodwill at the moment. The challenge, I believe, is mainly related to 2 things. First, could that kind of reporting and indicators be made kind of mandatory or not for the member states as part of the semester of economic policy coordination? And second, how do we communicate about this? Now, the most visible, of course, would be if the Transition Performance Index was integrated into the semester of economic policy coordination, and so therefore part of the spring and autumn economic forecasts. But this could, I suppose, be a little bit difficult to implement in practice. So if that's not possible, I think the Commission should think maybe of staging a separate event each year, in addition to the semester, to evaluate the EU's performance on sustainability. And that, for example, could be linked to other processes which are mandatory. And I'm thinking, for example, of the national energy and climate plans that the member states now need to submit on a yearly basis. So these are the ways I think the Commission could try and provide a bit more visibility for the Transition Performance Index.
Thank you very much, Frederic. Thank you very much for this. It was a really spot-on intervention. I noted indeed, your point about making the how to make the index kind of more mandatory, and how to communicate around it in the best possible way. So now the floor goes to Rutger Högstra. Rutger, you're actually the CEO of metricsforthefuture.com, and you're supporting governments, international organizations, and companies in moving beyond GDP. You have a book that says it all, Replacing GDP by 2030. So my question to you is, why is the GDP still the measure of progress, despite the criticisms that we have been listening to, and how can TPI become an influential player in this beyond GDP arena? Rutger, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks very much for this opportunity. I must also say I'm the spokesperson for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is a large group of citizens, policymakers and scientists, and governments working towards a well-being economy. So it would also be very good, I think, to see how we could close those links. So to your question, in my book, basically, I looked at the 70-year history and tried to analyze why exactly is GDP so influential in our society, and why have all the beyond GDP indicators so far not really been so successful. And the crux of the book is that after the war, the economists came together and created this one mandatory index, like Frederic says, a mandatory index which spread throughout the world. And I think it's especially important in this context to realize that Europe played a hugely important role in this harmonization process. And if you look at the situation of beyond GDP, we've had around 50 years of suggestions actually of beyond GDP indicators. So this is actually one of many, I think. And I think one of the major problems is that we are lacking kind of harmonization. And I think it would be very good also for the European Commission to have a look at this. And I think they're in an excellent position to actually drive that. But beyond that, let's have a look at the TPI and see whether the success factors can actually be used to analyze whether the TPI in 10 years, for example, will it be the system that the European Commission uses for evidence-based policy? So I'd like to stress three things actually in that sense. First, many people think that it's kind of a content debate, so that the content of this index or others are the focal point actually of what drives the success. Actually, if you look at the history, I can name nearly 6-7 Nobel Prize winners that have tried to tackle this, and many of their suggestions have faltered. And if you look at the most successful ones, like the Human Development Index and SDGs, I think there are things that you could say about those conceptually. So while I admire quite a few of the things in the TPI, and I'm also critical of others, like Patricia, I think, mentioned quite a few important points about the environmental sustainability aspects, I don't actually think it's the content that will definitely be the long-term success factor. So I want to get to the second success factor, and that's where I'm really excited, and that's where the fact that a large international institution like the European Commission is behind this. Because if you look at all the really successful ones, it's always either the World Bank, OECD, or UN, or a large institution which is behind the successful initiative. So I think in that perspective, it's very exciting. But as Frederic mentioned, there have, of course, been these initiatives before. So how do we know that in 10 years' time, this will be part of evidence-based policymaking? And I think that's the crux of the matter, not just a publication once a year of the ranking, although that will definitely gather a lot of attention, but how can you actually integrate this indicator into evidence-based policymakers? Which processes in the European Commission could you actually influence and insert this indicator? So for next year, I would hope that if we have another talk like this, I would hope firstly that the TPI had made strides in publishing, but also seeing how it can influence European policy. But I would also hope that the European Commission really takes a responsibility for harmonization, because we are desperately in need to harmonize the hundreds of systems that we have at the moment.
Thank you very much, Rutger. That was, again, a very, let's say, timely and topical intervention. I think that you touched upon two things, the harmonization dimension, and of course, the political push. And I think that it is the combination of both, that will make this basically a reality. Now we move on to Pierre. Pierre, please, you have as well, 4 minutes for your intervention. Pierre, you have a very long-standing career as economist of innovation and industrial economics. You're advisor for prosperity in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. And you have an amazing track record at the crossroads of research and innovation and economics. You are an expert as well on composites, and you are the mastermind of the TPI. So if I had to ask you one question, it would be more related to what Rutger was saying. So if you had to present the TPI, to the UN panel on global sustainability, what are the 3 things that you would tell them that they should focus on? And also, do you think that the TPI can support policy reforms at the national level? You have a maximum of 4 minutes for this, Pierre. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 3 key words will structure my answer: humanism, urgency, transparency. First, humanism. The Transitions Performance Index constitutes the adaptation to our times of the Human Development Index, developed 30 years ago precisely by the United Nations. This Human Development Index was a very simple model focused on 3 basic needs: education, health, and food. This focus proved powerful as it responded perfectly to the challenges of a world confronted to poverty and demographic explosion. We must now go beyond and address not only individual needs, but also collective needs, such as environment protection or democratic values. We must enhance the Human Development Index by going to the sort of Humanity Development Index. Second, urgency. The earth is burning, and if we do not unite on common goals, the risk of conflicts are serious. In order to achieve transitions timely, we need a compass to set direction and measure progress. The GDP measure, we just spoke about it, has been used after World War II in the context of reconstruction. Nowadays, we need a different global measure, and we cannot wait. The TPI is robust. That was also one of the points underlined, and it brings results. As a sound complement to GDP, the TPI can already respond to the urgency of the moment. What is crucial now is building a consensus and a community to make use of it. And I noted the suggestions in this respect. Finally, transparency. The world has changed. The present open session is a good example of the ability to involve citizens in the policy dialogue. Because transitions will change so profoundly our way of life, we must not decide top-down how to manage the process and its speed. The TPI is based on transparent and available data. It is easy to understand and use. It will therefore respond to the need of transparency. It will create confidence and make real progress of policies possible.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for this very inspiring conclusion. I would also like to thank the panelists for your excellent and spot-on interventions, all of them very complimentary. And now let's just quickly pick 2 questions from the audience, and I would be very grateful, because we don't have time, and I still need to conclude, if you can take the question that resonates best with you, and you can make an elevator pitch of maximum, let's say, 30 seconds on that question. Could we see the questions on the screen, if that is possible, from Slido? I think that we have some issue in seeing the questions. If that is the case, then what I will do is just simply, here we have the question. So the question says, can metrics such as composite indicators, which are essentially one number, capture efficiently all the aspects of sustainability? Can you please give us a 1-sentence elevator pitch on this? And I will start with Mario. Mario.
Well, it's very important to understand that this process is also a theoretical process, and there is a conceptual framework to present a scoreboard, which is very, very important. Obviously, having aggregate number gives you some opportunity to think a lot about the ranking, about the direction that any country is taking. But the scoreboard of this type of indicators, you see the 4 pillars and different dimensions, that are very helpful too.
Thank you very much, Mario. We move to Patricia. Patricia?
Yes, I mean, obviously it's extremely difficult and complex to measure sustainability with a limited number of indicators, and which is why I would also like to stress that the selection of indicators seems to be a very technical exercise, but we have seen that selecting indicators is really about setting political priorities and about what we identify as what counts, what counts. And this is why I would also like to emphasize that civil society and research, next to policymakers and institutions, have an important role to play in identifying these indicators and creating a consensus around what is it that counts, and so we can count what counts.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Very, very spot on one. Frederic, the floor is yours.
Well, obviously, having one indicator for sustainability sounds like a good idea. Obviously, the main question is how you build such an indicator, and that is something that the scholars who spoke before me know a lot more about. I think the big question now really is how, if we ever come to adopting such an indicator, how do we integrate this to the Stability and Growth Pact? I think this is the real hard question that Europe needs to answer. Does it want to risk diluting the Stability and Growth Pact with such an indicator, or does Europe want to bring a little bit more of a sustainability dimension to the Stability and Growth Pact, which is really focused on GDP? I think this is the key question. Today we're talking about the sustainability of public.
Yes, thanks a lot, Frederic. We have to move on to Rutger quickly. Rutger?
Yes, I'm hearing music in my ear, so I'll just try and talk over it. I think sometimes
Well, Commissioner Gabriel, thank you very much indeed for speaking to me. Let me take it from a broad range, first of all, these Research and Innovation Days. What are you trying to achieve with them?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all that contributed for this extraordinary event because 30,000 people registered, more than 100 panels and sessions discussing on missions, on partnerships, on innovation, research and education for Europe. That's a great achievement. So for me, these Research Innovation Days are a great occasion. First, really to see what are our assets, excellence, European excellence in science and research. That's something that we can be proud. On the other side, it's a great occasion to co-create and co-design our policies and our instruments in order to achieve better results. That means that we need to build synergies. We need to talk about the novelties in our Horizon Europe program. We need to talk about skills and education because actually it's very clear. It's thanks to the research and innovation that we can achieve the green and the digital transformation of our societies and economies. But at the core of this, we have research, innovation and education. So I think that today we are sending a very strong signal, a signal of co-leadership and a signal of co-ownership. And that's for me Research and Innovation Days.
Let's think about the picture of innovation research around Europe. One of the questions that Europe faces right now is a divide,